Let's go.
Let's go. Oh, no.
Do you want to?
Sorry. I'll let you.
Next one. I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Don't say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have rage issues!
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where we love kids, we love children. We think that they're great, and they're not annoying at all, and they don't cause our dogs to bark really loudly in the background at all, anytime. I am Lauren. I'm Lauren Brooks. Hi, Karen.
Hi, I love how on cue Riven is this morning. That's great.
Nice. It's just been. I mean, I apologize. I don't think it's going to be difficult to stop him because I think that the exterminator also should be doing his rounds at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there are several small children on my floor, some of whom really like riding their scooters up and down the hallway, which is fine, except it drives my dog insane. And also they like ramming into the wall that is directly opposite where my apartment door is. So
oh dear.
That's fun. It's fun. It's great. How are you, Karen?
I'm great. It's, beautiful morning. I think, I don't know, I haven't really gotten up yet, so it's been a long week. How is it that short weeks are the longest weeks?
I think it's because
you wouldn't know because your jerk boss doesn't give you Labor Day off, but
I do get a 3-day weekend though every week. So it's more like I didn't get a 4-day weekend this time around, which kind of pissed me off. But I think some of it is coming off of like a vacation. You feel like, oh, I've had this like extra day and everything, and then you're like, why do I have to do work now? That's stupid. That's a bad idea. Who invented this?
Right? Like, well, first of all, I think every weekend should be a 3-day weekend. Really, I think every weekend should be a 4-day weekend, and we should just do 3-day work weeks. But that's just me, apparently. Anyway, I'm fine. How are you?
Other than the fact that it is like a fucking sauna here in New York City, and not in like a good way, in like a very dirty and uncomfortable way. I'm fine. I'm doing good. Looking forward to having this chat today. We're going to talk about a director that I've never really thought of particularly, but she is very important, and so we're going to have a conversation about some of her back to school films, because it is September and the kids are going back to school, I assume. I don't know. That does mean that there will be less children in the hallways on weekdays, which is nice.
It does mean that. Now, here in California, kids have been going back to school since like the beginning of August, but I don't know. The rest of the country, they're still, I think, mostly doing it right. Which is like we go to school in September.
That's wild to me. When do California kids get off of school?
May.
Okay, well that makes sense. I mean, then like I know that in New York it gets pushed into June. I think there have been times where it's been pushed into July, depending upon snow days and stuff like that.
Yeah, we don't really ever have those. And yeah, they never, there's been like 1 or 2 times in the last, I don't know, 20 years where they've had to add a day or two on to the end of the school year because of weather, but mostly we don't have that problem here. But yeah, it's like schools, it used to be just standard, like everywhere here, everybody went back to school the day after Labor Day. It just was just how it was. And then you went to school through the middle of June. And then at some point, well, first of all, they were doing year-round school, and they would have different tracks because some schools were so overcrowded. And so then they would have like, you'd have your summer vacation, so to speak, like in December and January or whatever. So they had that. And then it's just kind of over time has migrated to now all the school districts start at all different times. Sometimes they'll start like on a Thursday, which is really weird. I don't understand that. But yeah, they start going back to school. A lot of districts start like the first or second week of August, and there's still a couple that don't start until September, but it's really rare. And it's also terrible because it's still so blazing hot in August, and we do have schools that don't have AC, and so it's just miserable for kids and teachers, but I know they have reasons for it. I don't agree with the reasons, but yeah, here we are.
So we're going to talk about back to school.
Let's do.
Before we get into that, I just wanted to mention really quickly. It was funny because last week we were talking about how isn't it nice that we no longer talk about garbage people consistently on this podcast? We do mention them every once in a while, like the fact that Harvey Weinstein is a rapist. And we can also now say that about Danny Masterson, who has been sentenced to 30 years to life for rape. It's two women who accused him, and this is basically the maximum penalty that has been allowed for
Yeah.
for this. So like he could have been sentenced to more, but they're not going to do that because they literally can't. But this is a really, I think this is really I mean, I never want to say it's a fantastic thing. It's a good thing that someone is being punished for this. There's been a preponderance of evidence against Masterson. Like it would have been shocking to see him not sentenced. But this is like a pretty hefty sentence, and particularly interesting in view of the fact that this was all also related to the Church of Scientology, and and you never want to draw too many big conclusions about it. This could indicate that maybe the Scientology has definitely come under fire more so in the past like 10 years than it probably has ever. And there's been a lot more scrutiny on it. And so you do kind of wonder if maybe they're kind of cutting their losses or if they just do not have the same degree of power that they used to. But so regardless, Danny Masterson's going to go to jail, which is wonderful. We are glad of that.
Yeah, this is the type of story we would like to talk about when we're talking about garbage people. Is not like, hey, this person we just found out did a bunch of stuff. It's like, no, this person's being held accountable for the stuff that they have done that we've known about for a long time, and it's good to see finally some justice in that case because I mean, this has been a long time coming. These accusations first came out a couple of years ago. There was a trial that ended in a mistrial, and then they moved forward. I think there were two other accusers originally that ended up like they weren't able to file charges against him for those. But yeah, it really does feel like a little bit of a sigh of relief that when it's so in general, especially like even if you take out a very powerful religious organization, it's so impossible to get convictions against people in rape crimes and other sexual violent crimes. So when we get to see someone going away for 30 years getting the maximum sentence, it really does feel like okay, between Weinstein, it's like that we see that it's possible, and we just have to keep fighting for justice.
Yeah, and I think that so one of the articles that I was reading about this actually came from the BBC, and it mentioned the fact that Scientology was the issue of Scientology was very heavily involved in the case. So the judge allowed for both sides to argue about Scientologists' dogma, about practices of Scientology, things like that, because Masterson and the women who accused him are all members of the Church of Scientology. And so it's interesting because this is a case where Scientology has been very much front and center. Yeah. It hasn't just been Masterson, who happens to be a Scientologist. It's been part and parcel of the Church of Scientology, as they call themselves.
Which is why they've been so involved, because this stands to make them look really bad. And the biggest thing we know about Scientology is that they care very much about appearances and perception. And so that's why they fought so hard. And that's where it's like, I look at this and I wonder, I don't know if this is a sign, him getting convicted in the first place, let alone getting sentenced. I don't know if it's a sign of their power waning a little bit, or if they, like you said, if they're just cutting their losses, if they just decided, you know what, it's not worth, he's not someone that is worth fighting over, and just kind of gave up. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I mean, it has definitely brought more scrutiny on them, and they've been pretty heavily scrutinized for the past, at least the past 10 years.
Yeah, it's when the first documentary Going Clear came out.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't the first, but that was definitely a big one that really started to make people really think, okay, this isn't just some kooky religion. There's other stuff going on.
To pay much closer attention to what was actually going on with the Church of Scientology, and then like you say, this wasn't just some weird California celebrity thing, basically.
Right.
There's actually a whole systematic abuse, basically.
Exactly. And then Leah Remini and Mike Render's show really really drew a lot of attention, and that was honestly where I really started to understand the scope of what we're looking at here. And
well, I will link the article about Masterson, but yeah, he has been convicted and sentenced, and we are happy about that.
We are.
It's a good thing. Step in the right direction.
Bye-bye.
So speaking of stories about terrible men, we're going to talk about some Amy Heckerling films, and a lot of her films involve terrible men. Surprisingly so, and I think that's one of the things we should address while we discuss this. But actually, the reason why we want to talk about Amy Heckerling is that she was made famous in a lot of ways for making these kind of coming of age films, and particularly back to school, high school, college movies about sort of younger people in their teens and 20s trying to navigate the world and fucking up massively as they do. So Heckerling has been in kind of like been in the business since the 1970s, really. She attended New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, my alma mater. I went there for the academic side of film criticism, not the
Did you know her?
side. I did not, because I went there in 2009. 2008, sorry. So
you're so young.
And one of the things that I was very amused by, and this was from an interview in the book Breaking In: How 20 Film Directors Got Their Start. In one of her classes when she was at the High School of Art and Design in Manhattan, she noticed that a boy next to her had written about wanting to be a film director, and she said, quote, "I was really annoyed because I thought that if an idiot like that guy could say he wanted to be a director, then so could I, and certainly I should be a director more than he should."
And that is why we love her, and that is why we're talking about her today.
And I love the fact that is what got her on to like being, hey, if that idiot can be a director, I certainly can. I enjoy that. I think that there's a healthy element of spite and of like, oh, stupid men can do it. Then I definitely can do it because I'm not a stupid man.
Yep. And then what I love is that she went on, and her first film ends up being something that I mean, it's not a perfect movie, but it definitely is it's considered a classic 80s movie, and that was her very first one.
And in a lot of ways, the classic 80s movie. I mean, it has been treated as very much of a template for a lot of the 80s rom-coms, high school comedies, sex comedies, etc. So the first one we want to talk about is Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which was released in 1982 and was directed by Heckerling, and also her and Cameron Crowe essentially wrote the screenplay together. They worked out some of the information based upon Crowe's original book, released in 1981, also called Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And this is a film that is just, from the moment it starts, it is an 80s film. Like, it's so 80s. The soundtrack is 80s. You get the whole thing of like all of the different characters that we're going to follow throughout the movie going into the mall, working at the pizza place, working at the cinema, checking out guys, checking out girls. And it's and like you've got a soundtrack that includes like the Go-Go's, and I'm trying to think of who else is on, everybody. And it's just a very 1980s film. So to start out with, Karen, was this what the 80s were like? Like, I was not born in 1982. I'm going to say that right now.
Well, I want to first clarify that I did not see this in the theater when it came out because I was still a tiny child. So, but it's so funny because no, this is an exaggeration of what the 80s were like, but there are certain things where I follow a few Gen X people on TikTok and stuff, and they'll talk about like crazy things that we used to just do in the 80s, or the way the world just used to be. And I'm always like, was that an exaggeration? Like, were my parents around more than I remember? And then I'll watch a movie like Fast Times at Ridgemont High and there's no parents around. I'm like, no, they really were, like, just not there. Like, I don't know where our parents were, but they were gone.
Well, there does seem to be that, because like, so you've got this entire cast of people who are, all supposed to be teenagers. Most of the actors are actually in like their 20s, right?
Yeah.
But they're all supposed to be teenagers. And yeah, there is like, as I think we discussed a bit in Heathers, when we talked about Heathers, there are no parents.
Mm-hmm.
There are no adults. Like, the adults that there are the teachers, and they are like completely checked out in a multitude of ways.
Right.
So you've got these kids, you got like, I mean, one of the more distressing scenes for me in the entire film is where the 15-year-old girl sneaks out of her house to go on a date with a 26-year-old man and lose her virginity. And it's like, I have so many questions about this. And yeah, it is an exaggeration, and I think that it is about like, I think that no matter what generation you're from, there is a distance from your parents when you're a teenager. You have this entire life, a lot of which revolves around school and all of these different social relationships and social issues, and this kind of thing about getting older, being in high school, wanting to be treated as an adult but also not really being an adult, all of those different things. And so yeah, there's this absence of the adult world, despite the fact that all of these kids are trying to be adults. They're like, I know, the one guy who is so proud of his car, the Judge Reinhold character, is so proud of his car and is like proud of being a working man, and what he does is he flips burgers at a local burger joint, but he's a big man on campus because of this.
Yeah, and like people want to hit him up for a job and stuff, but I just wanted to go back to the absence of parents really quickly. And just because it does seem like, yes, I totally agree with you, every generation kind of has their like distance from their parents, but it does seem like, I really think this is true, that there was a particular something that happened from like the mid 70s through the 80s where parents really were kind of more checked out than other generations had experienced. Like, they just were doing their own thing. They really weren't involved. Like, I remember they used to have, I think it came on every night at like around 10. They would have like this PSA that would pop up. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? And it was like, not, oh, your kids are out like doing something bad, you better go get them. It was like, no, really, like, reminder, you have kids. Like, do you know where they are? So yeah,
and this film very much also references the fact that the mall was kind of like the center of outside of schools, it was one of the centers of social life,
right? Which was totally true.
And there was, even when I was growing up, there was that attitude of like, the mall was almost like, not a babysitter, I won't say that, but it was a place that you could safely drop your kids off at and they would be fine. They would go to the arcade, they would go to the movie theater, they would go eat, whatever, and then you would pick them up at the mall a couple of hours later. Like that, like I even did that when I was growing up, particularly in the aughts, right? So it was still that kind of center of a space that you can go to be with people your age without parental supervision that also wasn't school. And so this film really like kind of enforces that this is a world in which these kids can kind of occupy this space that is an adult world but also isn't an adult world. It's kind of their own space.
Right. But as far as like the things that have the storyline elements to it, certain things like that, it's very much exaggerated. The teachers, all of that, like it's an exaggerated view of the 80s, but it's also not entirely untrue or incorrect or misrepresenting the 80s at all. So to answer your question, kind of, yeah, that was what the 80s were like.
This is exactly what the 80s were like. Well, and for anyone who has like ever watched 80s movies, this stars like a huge spectrum of 80s stars. So you've got Jennifer Jason Leigh, Judge Reinhold, Phoebe Cates, Eric Stoltz, who is actually playing a very small part here. Forrest Whitaker, who is playing a very small part.
Nicolas Cage, who ends up like, I don't even know if he has any lines. I think some of his stuff got cut.
Yes. I noticed at the end because it credited him as like Nicholas Coppola.
Yeah.
Little Nicky Coppola was in this. I missed him. Yeah. Apparently he's in one of the scenes in the burger joint that he's.
Oh, you didn't see him?
I missed him completely. I did not notice him. I'm gonna have to go back and look.
Yeah, he works with Brad. So, but it's I don't, like I said, I don't even think he ends up with any lines. I think everything that he was supposed to do originally got cut. So
little baby Nicholas Coppola. Back
Ray
before
Walston
he was Nick Cage.
Yep. Ray Walston is a teacher, Vincent Chiavelli. Yeah. It's a great cast.
It is a really fascinating cast, but I think one of the things that makes this film known in some ways is of course Sean Penn as Spicoli. And this is one of his earliest roles, I think.
Yeah.
And it was definitely the role that kind of launched him. And it's interesting to look at that role as being the role that launched him into stardom, given that he never really played those kinds of characters after that. He is this, stoner surfer guy who just kind of muddles his way through existence. And he is iconic. Like watching him, you're just like, I don't know what this guy's on, but he's having a great time. Like he's just making his way through. But so much of this film is about these kids basically muddling their way through. And
because of the lack of adult supervision.
Well, and I think, because of the lack of adult supervision, there's definitely no guidance, right? No one is there but also what I have to say, when you're 16, 17 years old, you don't really believe in guidance.
Right.
I do remember being like 17 years old and being absolutely convinced that I knew everything. No one could tell me anything. No one could like explain to me. And I was a good kid. I wasn't going out really late at night or getting drunk or anything like that. But I did not believe that anybody could tell me anything about anything that I didn't already know. And I was 17.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're an idiot when you're 17, basically. But I think that this film really gets at that, like you said, the performance of adulthood and attempting to particularly figure out, particularly when it comes to relationships, sexuality, like what you actually want, and the way that people posture about it and pretend that they're more experienced than they are, or pretend that they understand the way that the world works more than they actually do.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Sean Penn's character for a minute though. Because I think it's so interesting. He is looked at from the beginning as this burnout who's just getting really, really stoned in his VW bus. But it's interesting because when we first really meet him, it's, showing up the first day of class. He gets to class late and the teacher has locked the door, which is I don't know if teachers still do that, but that's definitely something that used to happen in my high school. And when the teacher, Ray Walston, does let him in, gives him this whole lecture about being late and everything, and rips up his schedule. Just ripped up his schedule. Like, why does he do that? He's just being an asshole. And if you watch Sean Penn in that moment, like as Spicoli, he is a little crushed. He's like, he showed up to class, like, yeah, he's this like, he's not taking things seriously in life, but he showed up, and his teacher just like ridicules him in front of everybody, rips up his schedule, has no respect for him, and just embarrasses him. And there's this moment where you can really see like he's crushed. And after that, he decides to just react, retaliate and just do all kinds of crazy things to get at his teacher for this and to not take it seriously. I think it's such a I think it's a more nuanced character than people like to look at it as. I think we remember the pizza delivery, which is funny, but we don't remember really why he does those things and escalates it throughout the school year. And it all starts with this moment where he is actually emotionally impacted by what this teacher does. And I think that matters. And then at the end of the movie, when it's like the end of school, they don't call it the prom, I don't think, they just call it like a dance. But when the teacher shows up at his house and is like, you wasted this many hours of my year, so now I'm gonna waste your time so you can't go to the dance, and starts quizzing him basically on history. And we don't like, it doesn't get really pointed out, but Spicoli actually knows a lot more of the history that he's been taught than the teacher, I think, expected. And so when Mr. Hand is like, well, I think I've made my point, it's like, what point did you really make? Because he actually remembered and retained a lot more than you expected, or that you ever would have believed he would have, and you don't acknowledge that.
I think that relationship, the Mr. Hand and Spicoli, actually has a really interesting arc. And it does, and I do think that in that moment, and we get a little bit of him like kind of talking about Thomas Jefferson, right? And about what Jefferson did. And you get this moment between the two of them where it's like they are two so completely different people who have a completely different understanding of the world around them. And yet there's this moment where they're kind of meeting at a point where just like, I get it. And the other's like, I get it too.
Yeah.
and so there is this moment, and I think that it's very much both Sean Penn's performance and also Ray Walston's performance, that there's a meeting there between the two of them that is very interesting, and it doesn't go further than that. Like, it's not like, actually you're a smart kid, right? But there's an understanding, I think, that develops, particularly by the time you get to that point. And so it's really interesting. They just have very different values. But going back to that scene where he tears up his schedule, I absolutely agree with you. There's also this attitude of like the violence that the older generation does to kids by not paying attention to them, by not thinking of them as people. And I do think that that's one of the things that actually, in a certain sense, runs through all of the three films that we're going to talk about. Is not just the way that these kids are kind of trying to be adults, but the cruelty of the adult world in relationship to them, not necessarily in relationship to other adults, because we don't see that a lot, but the way that the adults dismiss, belittle, are just kind of casually dismissive at best of these kids who are struggling, who are trying really hard to, figure out who they are and what they want to do. And so the scene where Judge Reinhold is, talking with the irate customer who is asking for his money back, and then he ends up getting fired. It's the same thing. It's just like that unfairness of adulthood. Right. And the unfairness with which grown-ups, as it were, treat these teenagers, that at the same time they're expecting to behave as grown-ups. And so that kind of casual cruelty, I think it really comes through particularly in that scene that you're talking about, and in the scene in the burger joint. And it's something that runs throughout the entire film. Yeah, I agree. So let's talk a little bit about like sexuality, which is one of the major things featured in this film, and again, particularly about that whole performance aspect of it, that everybody talking like they're experts when they're quite obviously not. And I think it's most prevalent, particularly with Mike Damone, so this was the first time I actually had seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I thought I'd seen it, but I realized like 10 minutes I was like, I have not seen this movie. But Mike is one of those characters that, like, I think more so than almost any other character in this film is like, I knew that guy. He is that guy who is just he's like, I'm a ladies' man. I know everything. I know everything about everything. It's just like, you know, shit. Like, you just pretend. It's this performance. And then of course it turns progressively worse and more serious and more complicated. But so much about this film, it's very much a sex comedy in a certain sense, but it also deals with things like abortion, like virginity, and then the expectations of other people, and the way that you are expected to perform for other people, for other teenagers in particular.
Yeah. As far as like the issue of abortion, one of the things that I had forgotten about, because it's been a while since I've seen this, but I had forgotten how casually I think it's treated. Like I mean, when Stacy comes and tells Mike, yeah, I'm pregnant, and he's just like, okay, well, you should get an abortion. She's like, yeah, I'm already doing that, but can you pay for part of it and give me a ride? Like, it's not a major, it's not a major debate. She's not like wrestling with this decision. It's just kind of like, yeah, this is what's going to happen, and then she ends up having to do it alone. But then her brother's there, and he knows what happened, and he doesn't give her a hard time about it. It's just kind of like, all right, well, let's go get some dinner, or whatever. And I think especially for this time period, the fact that wasn't like a major, like, it's an important plot point, but it's not like a philosophical argument at any point. It's just like, yeah, okay, and then this is what happens next.
Yeah, and I really like the scene between Stacy and Brad, because she doesn't tell him what she's doing, and there is that element of shame, though, that she kind of has to pretend so Mike doesn't show up to give her a ride. So she has to get Brad to take her, but she doesn't want to tell him where she's actually going. And then he sees her crossing the street,
right,
and
drops
and
her
he's
off
just
at the bowling alley, and then
and he's just there when she comes out, and he doesn't make a big deal out of it. He doesn't say, like, how dare you not tell me, or anything like that. He's just like, since when did you go bowling? Like,
right. He doesn't even demand that she like tell him who it was, or so that he can be big brother and like go avenge her or anything like that. It's just like, okay, all right, let's just let's just move on. But it's not in a like, let's pretend this never happened way either.
Yeah, it's he meets her at the point that she needs to be at. And so, like, you do get the impression that if she wanted to say more, he would be there to listen to her.
Yep.
But he's not going to pressure her to talk about it or to reveal anything that she doesn't actually want to do. And it's really a very sweet moment.
Yeah.
And so much of this film really is about these characters fulfilling stereotypes to a certain degree, and then undercutting those stereotypes and actually kind of revealing what's underneath that. Because, again, I think that is one of the major aspects of high school. You pretend to be someone. You pretend to fill a particular role, but you're also a person.
Right.
And underneath posturing and underneath all of the pretend, there is like this reality that's going on, and all of these characters reveal that reality at some level, while still maintaining kind of their aspects of, I'm the stoner guy, I'm the big man on campus, I'm the ditzy girl, all of those things.
Yeah. Should we talk about Phoebe Cates?
We talk about Phoebe Cates. What are your thoughts on Phoebe Cates? Because I do think it's a bit funny that Phoebe Cates now is like married to Kevin Kline. That's all that I could think of the entire time.
I know. And that she kind of like just retired from acting at a certain point. And she became, largely because of this movie, she became like a big sex symbol of the 80s. And it's interesting because I think that her character is kind of a funny one, because she is one that's always like, oh, I have all this experience. Here, Stacy, I'll teach you how to do blowjobs or whatever. And then there's this, like, she's always referencing this fiance in Chicago. And there's this, like, he probably isn't real But then at the end, she has this like letter from him where he's not coming to graduation. It's like, wait, she's crying real tears. Like, is there a boy in Chicago? I don't really know. Like, so her character is interesting, but yeah, it's very much a sex like a hypersexualized character. It's a lot like I think there was some inspiration for it in Mina Suvari's character in American Beauty and some others that we've seen, over the years. But yeah, this girl who is young, who probably developed very early. All the boys look at her. She's beautiful. And she does present herself as being much more experienced than she very likely is. Although it's never confirmed either way.
Yeah, it's never confirmed, but again, it's very much that part of the high school experience of someone you're kind of like, is this true? Like, is any of this accurate, or are you literally just trying to kind of seem like you're more experienced, you're more grown up, you're more mature than you actually are?
Right.
And of course, in a certain sense, it's also the way that people then get targeted and get abused and are mistreated, particularly women, by pretending to be older than you are, by pretending to be more mature, when you're really not ready for some of the things that you think you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things, just to go back to Stacy's character too. That's one of the things that's interesting about her. She lies about her age with this older guy who comes in, this 26-year-old, goes on a date with him, and does some, sexual things with him. I don't know if they go all the way or not. And then it's just like never comes up again. He never calls her, and then that's just kind of it. And so it's an interesting situation because that doesn't end up becoming like the main plot. It's other things that happen later to her. But yeah, so with Phoebe Cates, I mean, honestly, like making up a boyfriend in Chicago is a smart way to keep all the icky high school boys away from you.
True. But I like the place that particularly Stacy ends up, where she decides, like, and she has a line very near the end of the film also where she says, anybody can have sex. I want an actual relationship. So throughout this entire thing, it's been about like, oh, you've got to lose your virginity. You've got to, know how to give a blowjob, all of that stuff. And she basically comes to the conclusion of like, I really like this nerdy guy who works at the cinema, and I would rather go out with him and not sleep together than go out with all of these douchebags.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you get that title card at the end that's like, yeah, they've been in a relationship for 2 years and they still haven't gone all the way, which is so cute.
It is very cute, but it is definitely one of the most 80s of 80s films.
So overall, I'm curious because this was your first time seeing it and you had a lot of impressions because you thought you'd seen it before. But overall, what did you think of the movie?
I thought it was, I'm always a little uncomfortable with some of these sex comedies. And some of it is because you're talking about people that are supposed to be 16 years old. And they're doing things that are just like that. You are not ready for that. You stop that right now. That is inappropriate.
I will be your parent since your parents aren't here.
But I did like this. I liked the fact that there was a lot more underlying the characters than I think appears on the surface. And actually I think that that's something that runs through a lot of Heckerling's films, about these characters who seem, like I said, who seem almost tropes or stereotypes to start out with. And then as the film proceeds and you get to know them better and you get to see the way they interact with each other and how they grow and how they change, you realize just like, yeah, these are types. They're types that they're types that existed in my high school in one way or another. But they're also people and they're going through their own shit, and they're fucking up in the way that you do fuck up when you're 17 years old, in the way that you fuck up when you're 35 years old, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think that this film in particular really does get at that. And like you say, I think, when it comes to someone like Spicoli, but even when it comes to the entire film, there's an attitude that, this film is a particular thing. And it actually is more than that. It's more than just this 80s teen comedy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you liked it.
So yes, I did wind up liking it a great deal. And speaking of films that are very much in their time period, so fast forward about about more than a decade actually, and we get to Clueless,
If
which
Fast Times
is
at Ridgemont High is the 80s movie, Clueless in many ways is the 90s.
100%. And again, I wasn't in high school in the 90s, but also I was aware enough that I was like, yep, I know exactly what this is. In fact, I remember girls in my school beginning to talk like Alicia Silverstone in
Mhm.
Clueless, and me just being like, why are you talking like that? Like, we are definitely not Valley Girls. We are live in upstate New York. What is happening here? It was just like, it was this particular cadence of like speech. I was just like, why are you talking that way? So yes, Clueless, which is a 1995 coming of age story starring Alicia Silverstone and Brittany Murphy, Stacey Dash, Paul Rudd, and is actually an adaptation of Emma, which I always think is very humorous.
Mhm.
But set in a Southern California high school, and again, following along with some of the things we talked about with Ridgemont High, very much, an appropriate story in a lot of ways for high school because it's about kids thinking they know everything and really not knowing anything.
Yep. So true.
So where do we want to start with this? What are your feelings about Clueless, Karen?
I love Clueless. I had already graduated from high school when this came out. So like my entire high school or my entire school education existed somewhere between Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Clueless. But so I was in college, but but barely. And I don't know. Like I remember seeing Clueless multiple times in the theater. It's so funny. And living in Southern California too, and really recognizing a lot of the places that they go and a lot of the people that they're talking about, like the valley, and like it really it kind of lends something extra to it. But it's just such a good adaptation of Jane Austen and like really understanding her story and translating that into the high school experience of again kids who think they're much more grown up than they are, kids who are playing at being adults. um in this case, Cher's dad is actually there, but she kind of has to parent him. And there's like at some point, once the parents started to get more like be more present in their kids' lives, like there was a role reversal too. And I think it captures that really well. Yeah, and like it's the music and fashion are so 1995, and but yet like there's this time, like not timelessness to it, but there's just this like when you go back and watch it now, it's just fun to kind of open this time capsule and relive this very particular time in this very particular place.
Well, and that's the thing. I think that all three of these films make use of the fashion, the music, the speech patterns. Like, and it's interesting because Fast Times at Ridgemont High was so influential on later films. So was
Mm-hmm.
Clueless.
Yeah.
And like I said, Clueless was suddenly there were a bunch of girls in my middle school who were talking like, or my elementary school actually, who were talking like Alicia Silverstone. And I'm like, and again, so it's like that influence that these films actually had, but then also the fact that they're representing this time period very specifically, and
Yeah.
location very, very specifically, and very like, I guess truly, and in some ways you kind of look back on it and go like, man, that was a time. but
Yeah.
but they are still relatable, and so it comes back to this sensation of like, I think that Heckerling is very good at capturing in these films, at capturing the experience of being young, and
Yeah.
of and at the same time it's a very specific time and it's very universal. So this is an adaptation of an 1815 novel that is set in 1990s California and is still relatable to someone existing in 2023.
Yeah.
And I think that Heckerling does a really good job at kind of understanding again those elements that underlie character types. And so you get a character like Cher who you can sort of dismiss at the beginning. It's just like, oh, she's rich, she's into fashion, she's kind of bubbly and possibly a little bit dumb, but she's not dumb at all.
Right. She's not dumb, but she also is a little bit clueless in multiple ways, not just in love, but like she just kind of floats along through life. Things just work out for her. She's able to successfully negotiate higher grades. If she hits a car, she's just like, oops, like just she's a girl who's used to just getting away with shit.
Yeah, and through over the course of the film, it becomes clearer that like that can be dangerous and that can be bad and that can really affect other people's lives, and that's part of what she has to learn.
Right.
So the way that she essentially manipulates what's her name, Ty, the Brittany Murphy character, of like, I'm going to teach you how to like get guys. I'm going to teach you how to be popular. And it's like, leave her alone.
Yeah.
Like,
basically, I'm going to teach you how to be me.
Yeah, and to give her credit, she's trying to help as far as she is concerned. And it is all coming from a very good place, but it's ultimately damaging. It's damaging to other people. It's damaging to Ty. It's damaging to herself, and it's something that she has to like come to terms with ultimately when it's shown to her that like, you're not helping, you're not making this easier for other people, you're actually making it worse.
Yeah. Well, and it starts off where it does work. Like her first kind of makeover project is the teacher, Miss Geist. And then she's able to successfully kind of smush Miss Geist and Mr. Hall into a relationship, which by the end they're getting married. And so it's like her first attempt at this works. And so being, 15, 16 years old, that kind of gives her that sense of like, I'm really good at this. I can do this with everybody. So when Ty comes along, it's like, she's already been successful at this. So she doesn't really understand that was a special case, and that she was dealing with something that she was also able to observe from a distance. She wasn't part of that relationship, but when she's now doing this with a friend and trying to convert her friend over to be this version of herself, and it's not in a mean-spirited way, but she doesn't understand that like she's basically stripping her friend of who she is, or trying to, and also causing a lot of confusion, because these are all still teenage girls that have a lot of confused emotions that they don't even understand, and when you start playing with that, it gets very difficult very fast.
Well, yeah, exactly. It comes back to that, whole thing. You're 17 and you think you know everything. And part of the growing up that happens for Cher in particular is realizing that no, you don't know everything, and in fact, you're missing a lot of things.
Yeah,
you're not noticing a lot of things. You're not a grown up yet.
Right.
And that's part of what growing up is. And again, it comes back to something similar to Ridgemont High, like the performances. We're going to put on different outfits, we're going to put on different voices, different kinds of behavior that we think we're supposed to do as a teenager. And at that point, you don't really know who you are and what that means, or who other people are. And how you should actually deal with that.
And for Cher, when she gets to a point where she finally starts to just accept her friends, the people that are around her, without trying to change them, when she shows up at the skateboarding competition and sits with Ty and they kind of make up, when she decides to spend time with Christian and learn more about the things that are interesting to him, even though he's never going to be interested in her because he's gay, when she starts doing those things, then it does help her become a emotionally and mentally richer, intellectually richer person, because she's embracing the individuality of the people around her.
Yes, that is really well put. I agree with that. Well, in leading into, I think, the next one, let's talk a little bit about the representation of these relationships between older men and younger women.
Yeah.
Because one of the issues in Clueless, and some of this is partially a result of the fact that it's a Jane Austen adaptation.
Right.
Right. But even I think that Emma in Jane Austen is supposed to be like 19. Cher is supposed to be 17, I believe.
She turns 16 in the movie.
She turns
starts off,
16.
she's 15.
Okay.
She turns 16, yeah. Yeah.
And so there's this relationship that develops, or this relationship that kind of comes to fruition, I guess.
Right, yeah.
Between her and her stepbrother.
Ex-stepbrother.
Right? Ex-stepbrother Josh. Who's the Mr. Knightley character. And again, I think that some of this is because it's being pulled from Jane Austen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've got this guy who's related, but not really related, who's close to the family, who's close to her father, etc., but isn't actually like her brother. But with whom she's had this kind of more sibling, very close sibling relationship, right? And it develops increasingly that like she actually has feelings for him and he actually has feelings for her, which is okay. But there is an ick factor.
Mm-hmm.
And even like I think that this is one of those things that probably when I saw the film for the first time, it didn't click for me. But now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, that's you've done an end run around some issues here. Like some of this is just not okay because first of all, she's underage.
Mm-hmm.
Which is always a consideration. And it's a sweet relationship. Like I think that they both play it very well. But you do kind of, it's one of those that just raises red flags a little bit. Just like he's supposed to be in grad school, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's interested in his 16-year-old high school stepsister who's not really his stepsister anymore. There's just something that is there's just a little uncomfortable about it, and you kind of have to close one eye as you're watching the film.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it's played off as very like, yeah, this is the relationship that we've been building toward for the whole movie. But I think I don't want to like make assumptions about Amy Heckerling. I don't know if she has said this anywhere. I haven't actually researched it, but I feel like it kind of got a little bit away from her. I don't think that she intended it not either she intended it not to be creepy at all, or she did intend for it to be clear that it was a little bit creepy, and I'm not sure. Not sure which it is.
I mean, the creep factor would be toned down a little bit if one Cher was a little bit older.
Mm-hmm.
So if I didn't realize she was 16, I always assumed she was like 17 going on 18.
Yeah.
And also if Josh was a little bit younger.
Right. Yeah. If they kind of were closer in age, if he was maybe like early college instead of like going to law school,
yeah,
or at least on the verge of law school or whatever. But yeah. But there is a line at the end, and this is where I'm like not really sure what Heckerling's intentions were versus like what the audience actually receives. Because there's a line at the end when you're at the wedding, and it's like after Cher and what's his name? Paul Rudd's character. Anyway, after they've Josh, thank you. After they've kissed, and then Cher's voiceover is like, you know what happened next, and it goes to the wedding, and then she's like, as if I'm 16 and this isn't Kentucky. So it's like there is a joke about it. so it's like there's an awareness that this is fucking weird, but also it's like, is there enough awareness? I don't know.
Yeah, I wish that there's, or in some ways I wish that maybe they hadn't gone so far, that like there was this tension between them, that there's like this maybe like when she's a little bit older and maybe they would still have the same feelings for each other, but it's the fact that they push it far enough to like definitely imply that they are going to have some kind of relationship, whether or not that relationship is going to last,
right? Yeah.
But there is still that, like I said, that ick factor, that like I'm not certain whether that's okay.
Right.
I mean, legally it's not okay.
Right. Legally it's very not okay. But I also do think that a lot of it is just the fact that this is based on Jane Austen, and it's just like, well, we're gonna just do this. And I kind of feel like it's supposed to be icky a little bit.
Well, and I think that this is a good segue into a film that I think has actually been unfairly maligned. And I think that you agree with me on this, Karen. Like
Yes.
I just watched this film for the very first time yesterday, and this is a film that deals very directly with a an inappropriate and wrong relationship, and makes
Very
it very
much.
clear that it is inappropriate and wrong.
Hmm.
So this is the film Loser from 2000, starring Jason Biggs, Mina Suvari, and Greg Kinnear. And I give props to Greg Kinnear for making me want to punch his stupid face so badly. There's so many times where I was like yelling at the television, "Oh, just shove him into traffic."
I
Like
don't want to punch his face. I want to kick him in the gonads.
he's just I was just like throw him in a swimming pool. No, push him into traffic. Like just
Yes.
kick it. Like hit him, do something.
Yes. Yes. Oh, he's the worst. He is the
Uh
worst.
he is really the worst. So this is actually it's funny because I did not clock this, but this is supposed to be a remake of The Apartment, which starred Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine and Fred McMurray from back in the 1960s. But so this is a story about Paul Tannock, played by Jason Biggs, who is a kid from the Midwest and gets into a school in New York. I'm assuming that it's New York University because they keep showing Washington Square Park and the Village. But there are also some shots I'm just like, are we sure? I don't think that this is NYU. I don't know. I wasn't an undergrad at NYU, so there may be some things that I'm missing, but just there are times where I was like, I do not know where this is supposed to be taking place.
I'm confused. Is there more than one university in New York?
They're like, yes, many universities in New York, actually. There is only one university that is centered around Washington Square Park.
I'm
So,
totally joking. It's just, it's like every movie that's set in New York that people are going to school, they're going to NYU.
well, no, they're going to Columbia as well.
Sometimes that's
Just
true. But
uptown.
usually it's like like NYU is the default New York school because that's outside of New York, the only New York schools that anybody knows about are NYU and Columbia.
True. Well, this is definitely not CUNY. This is not like this isn't one of the boroughs schools or anything like that. So yeah, I'm assuming that it's NYU. I have questions. And while at NYU, he experiences the worst roommates in the history of roommates.
They're
Um,
awful.
he begins to have a interest attraction to Dora Diamond, played by Mina Suvari, who is meanwhile essentially homeless, mostly because she can't seem to get back home at any point because she keeps on missing her train, and is also having an affair with an English professor played by Greg Kinnear, who's the worst human being on the planet.
Yes.
So the
Besides the roommates, like they're all the
besides the
worst.
roommates, they're all the worst. This is a movie about how all of these men are terrible except for this one particular guy, which you
Who's
know
not
what?
from New York, and that's why he's not terrible.
Which you know what? Fine. I have thoughts about the cruelty with which New York is portrayed, but I will not start there. So I want to talk about like how terrible Greg Kinnear is and why we hate him.
Yes.
He's the
Fair.
worst. That's really what it comes down to. But yeah, all of these men are like, they're not just assholes, they're like aggressively assholish. They
Mm-hmm.
are attempting to just fuck with people, to hurt people, often for no good reason, right? And to kind of reinforce their superiority, their smugness, how much better they are than everybody else. And I think it's one of the problems that I had initially with the film was exactly that it was the first half of the film feels very mean. There's just a lot of meanness going on. It's the meanness of the roommates, it's the meanness of Alcott, it's just the kind of casual cruelty that runs through everything. And then as
It's
the
not
film
even
goes,
casual. It's pretty aggressively cruel.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the film proceeds, it becomes more about particularly these two characters finding each other, but also sort of enforcing their own perspectives, their own feelings, like breaking out of romanticism, breaking out of like the roles that are kind of being forced on them by other people, and gaining backbones. And I actually really enjoyed the film at the end of the day. Like, it isn't perfect. There are definitely issues with it. I don't think it's as good as Fast Times or as Clueless, but it's actually a very enjoyable little romantic comedy.
Yeah. I was telling you this before, but I remember when this came out and it got really panned, and I didn't actually know very many people, like friends who went and saw it, but the ones that did were like, it's not very good. But I saw it finally and I was just like, I don't know. I actually think this movie is pretty good. And then I don't think I'd seen it again since then. Maybe one other time I watched it like on TV or something. And so when we were talking about what movies to talk about today, and I brought it up, and I was like, yeah, I remember liking it more than other people. But when I went to rewatch it, I saw the RT score, I saw the Metacritic score, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm misremembering. Maybe this movie's terrible. And then I started watching it, and I was like, no, this movie is better than everybody says it is. Like, I was correct. So yeah.
It is. I mean, yeah, I think that you're right. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed, like, it was a fun experience. I actually am not a huge fan of Jason Biggs, but I quite liked him in this. And it's much like the other two films that we talked about. It's very 2000.
Yeah.
So this is now, by the way, this is moving now more into my realm of experience as a teenager. I graduated high school in 2004. So this film would have come out literally right at the beginning of my high school experience. This is a film about college, but the music and the clothing and the attitudes are just like, yes, 100%. Oh my God, what was wrong with us? Like, as soon as they mentioned it, we're gonna go see Everclear, it's just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
No, you're not gonna go see Everclear. Don't you dare go see Everclear. But like the haircuts and the stupid clothing and the leather pants, and just there are so many things I'm just like, yes, okay, fine. Yes, I definitely wore some things like that in high school. I did. I have pictures.
I want to see those pictures.
They're probably in my parents' photo album, because thank Jesus we did not have iPhones yet.
Sharon, you know what to do. Send me pictures.
Oh my God, some of those outfits. No, some of the outfits that, like, particularly early on in high school, yeah, that Dora wears, I was just like, yep, that's about right. Not the hairstyle, but the outfits.
And that's one of the things I think that is such a hallmark. We've talked about this with all three of these movies, but I think that's such a hallmark with Amy Heckerling and working with her heads of departments, her costume designer, her music coordinators, supervisors, everybody, like, to really work together to capture like a snapshot of the time period that each movie is being set in. She's very good at that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's and again, it's interesting. I did not think about this film as being a remake of The Apartment, but it is.
Yeah.
And very, very similar.
Inspired by it, yeah.
Yeah, very similar in a lot of ways. But it's interesting. So that's a film that was made in 1960. And this is a film that's being made in 2000. And it's that universality that this is very much a 2000 film, like the music, the clothing, the styles, the makeup, like all kinds of things. 100%. The very early cell phones, that people are finally beginning to have cell phones, but they don't really work right.
People still use payphones in this movie.
Exactly, yeah. And then at the same time having this universality of, like, yeah, I know guys like that. All of those guys, I've known guys like that. People like that because there is that underlying humanity to them, and that, people don't change that much, really. The clothes change, and maybe some of the attitudes change, and some of the behavior changes, but underneath we're still people, right?
Right.
And this one, in reference to what we were talking about with the inappropriate age relationships, you've actually got a relationship that is legal. She is overage, and her professor is also overage, but is also like painfully inappropriate.
Mhm.
And there are several points again in this film where I was just like, just out him, just like tell the dean what's happening and get his ass like kicked out of the university because this is ridiculous.
Yeah. But that's the thing about Dora, though, is that she so wants to believe that this relationship is real and that he actually cares about her that she doesn't want to do anything that's going to get him in trouble, you know? And
Yeah.
for Jason Biggs's character, I'm blanking on his name right now,
Paul.
Paul. For him, it's like it doesn't. It's not about bringing this guy down. It's like he doesn't want to be dragged into this like moral quandary. It's like just be a fucking human being. Like
Mm-hmm.
when he goes and has that conversation with the instructor, with the teacher, and it's just like, I'm not trying to blackmail you, I just want you to do what's right, and I want you to not mess with this person that I really
Mm-hmm.
care about.
Well,
And yeah.
and I liked that about his character because at every turn he's got these points where he could kind of fall from grace, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Where he could manipulate, he could be, and he would be doing it from a good perspective, right? He would be doing
Right.
the right thing in a certain sense because, like, yeah, this guy should be kicked out of the university. But he doesn't do it because he cares about this girl and he cares about who she is and also about what she wants. And I like the fact that this film he is very much like, it is about what she wants, and if what she wants is to be with this guy who is terrible and I hate, then
Mm-hmm.
I am not going to get in her way. As a result of that, I'm going to tell her that I think she's wrong, but I'm not going to stand in her way. I'm not going to tell her, like, no, you shouldn't go out with this guy, or no, you should go out with me. It's just like, all right, I'm going to be your friend then.
Yeah.
And I like that there's never this sense of like, oh, she's friend zoning him, or he's like manipulating things in order to get her to fall in love with him. It's just like, okay, I don't like this, but also that's what you want.
Yeah. He's accepting her choices
Mm-hmm.
and just letting it go. And that is what being a friend is. Sometimes it means that you have to just let your friend be with the shitty asshole and just be there for them to pick up the pieces every time that goes wrong, which is not infrequent.
Well, and also to stand up for himself. Like, he does reach a point where he's like, you know what, I'm not gonna be a part of this anymore. I
Yeah.
can't be, right? If this is what you want to do with your life, okay, but also you're wrong, but also okay.
Right. Like, I'm not going to make you feel bad about it, but I also, I'll be here where I can, but I also
Mm-hmm.
can't just like watch this happen over and over again. But also like I'm here, like
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't ever go away completely.
Yeah, he doesn't abandon her.
Right.
And even though she's wrong.
Yeah. She is wrong because she's believing this guy. Like, obviously her mom is very controlling, so being going to school in the city and everything gives her a little sense of freedom and growing up, but she's still very, in a lot of ways, like she you get this sense that intellectual, like, she's book smart and she does have the ability to take care of herself, so she's a little bit street smart too, but she's also very naive and just wants to believe people when they say they care about her. And that's
Yeah.
why she keeps getting stuck in this hamster wheel with this professor, because she wants so much to believe that when he tells her he loves her, he actually does.
Mm-hmm. So it's actually, I think, a much more interesting and well-made film than it has been given credit for. So any other thoughts about Loser, or about Amy Heckerling and her body of work?
I think that she's a director that it kind of gets overlooked and forgotten about. Like people love a lot of her movies, and she hasn't actually made that many movies. But the ones that she's made, she did Look Who's Talking, which is weird but so delightful. And then these three that we've talked about, she did one of the vacation movies. Like she has an interesting collection of movies that people really like and talk about, but I think they tend to forget that there's like a human woman attached to all these movies that made them, and so I don't think she gets enough credit. And I think she deserves more. And yeah, if we've talked about something that you haven't seen, if you haven't seen Fast Times or Clueless or Loser, please go take care of that, because I think you're in for a treat, because I think that she has a perspective with storytelling that you know this was something that kind of blew up on Twitter the other day, of like someone made a comment about a movie that's out or coming out soon. And oh, I would like to have seen this directed by a woman. And the person that made that comment really shouldn't have. Like it was not the right person to deliver a message like that. But I think that what you see when you look at certain types of movies, like a sexual comedy from the 80s, a high school one from the 80s, or a teen high school comedy from the 90s, or whatever it is, I think looking at this as like, how would these movies have gone differently if a different director had done them,
Well, a different writer too. I mean,
yeah.
she's very much involved in writing her own screenplays and in being involved. I think with Fast Times, her and Cameron Crowe kind of adapted his book.
Right.
And I believe she's got a writing credit on Clueless. She's got a writing credit on Loser. I think she has a writing credit on the Look Who's Talking films. It's interesting to talk about all of these films because all of them, particularly the ones in the 80s and 90s, are like, they're seminal films. Clueless is a generational film. Fast Times is a generational film.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about the fact that these are films that are being made by this female director and this female writer. Because I had no idea that Fast Times was directed by a woman. Like it would never have occurred to me. I have known of the film for a very long time, obviously, but it was just like, no, it's an 80s sex comedy. Of course, it's directed by a man. It's like, no, it's not.
Right. And well, that's the thing. It's like, I remember, like, I don't know when I first saw it. I don't remember how old I was, but I remember throughout the 80s, it was on TV a lot, obviously heavily edited, because in the 80s they edited everything. But like the scenes that they would show, the quintessential scenes were like Stoner Spicoli or, Judge Reinhold. And like, they didn't really show the girls in the promotional stuff for the movie very much. It was all focused on the boys. So it was, I don't think I realized it was directed by a woman or even focused on girls at all until I actually watched the movie. Which is wild to me, because like the girls are, like the main, especially Stacy, she's like one of the main characters. And yeah. And so I think Amy Heckerling is an underrated director. And I say that because of the fact that, like you say, these are quintessential films, but she, as the helmer of them, does not get enough credit for what she has given to film history.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. So definitely check out all of these films. Fast Times is on Netflix. Where's Clueless?
Paramount Plus.
And Loser is also rentable. I don't think it's findable elsewhere.
Yeah, I couldn't find it anywhere else. I rented it.
Yeah, all of these films are also rentable, so for like $2 or $3. So, and they're all worth it. They're especially if you haven't seen them. Like they're all 100% worth it. Definitely worth checking out. And of course, and then Amy Heckerling is also behind some of my favorite films, the Look Who's Talking films, which I know are stupid, but also are wonderful, and
they're so great. They're dumb, but and weird, but they're so wonderful. And
it's such a weird idea. It's such a weird idea when you actually go back to it. It's just like, wait a minute, like, and big stars too, like John Travolta and Kirstie Alley, but also Bruce Willis.
Yeah,
is like voicing a baby, and then Roseanne
in the sequel. Oh, yeah, it's so great. What is happening?
I think Look Who's Talking now is like Danny DeVito? No. Danny DeVito. It's with the dogs, Danny DeVito and Diane Keaton.
Oh my gosh.
Are the dogs.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
So, like weird idea, but somehow worked, and we're very popular.
Totally. Yeah. Like her movies made money. So
Yeah. So definitely check those out. And I think that's gonna close us out for this week. On our back to school episode. That was exciting. And of course,
yeah.
we would like to thank all of our wonderful patrons, who include Ali, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Heather, James, Judy, Karen, Carriata, Lauren, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Robert, Steve, Sharon, and Tao. Thank you so much for continuing to support us. If you would like to be one of their number, we are on patreon.com/Citizen Dame. And we should also have a bonus episode coming up this month. So we're excited about doing that as well.
Yes.
And you also get fun little things. Again, I keep on repeating this. If you've not received buttons and stickers, please let me know. Send me your US mailing address and I will get those out to you immediately. I think I've got everybody, but one never knows. I'm got really bad at this for a little while. We also still have our Zazzle store. That's zazzle.com/Citizen Dame Pod, and our Ko-Fi account, ko-fi.com/Citizen Dame. And you can check out our reviews and editorials and other little things on our website. That's citizendamepod.com. And if you want to get in touch with us, our email address is citizendamepod@gmail.com. We did get an email from Shakita, who says she's been listening to some of our older episodes, and we have changed a great deal over the last however many years we've been doing this.
Actually, this year is our 6th or this month is our 6th anniversary.
Wow, 6 years. So
yeah.
Wow. Yeah. We have changed a lot. We've grown, we've matured. We have all kinds of different perspectives. We're very glad to not be constantly talking about terrible men. Always a good time.
It is.
And you can also follow us on all of the various socials. We're still on Twitter somewhat, though not as much anymore. Please follow us on other socials if you can. We are on Twitter and Instagram at Citizen Dame Pod, and we are also on Blue Sky, Citizen Dame Pod at bluesky.social. And we're also on our letterbox. That's at Citizen Dame, where you can find links to all of our episodes, articles, things like that. Definitely follow us on Letterboxd. If you follow us on Twitter and you don't follow us on the other locations, try to move over to there because Twitter is horrible now.
I deleted Twitter from my phone. So
I'm getting very close to deleting my actual Twitter account, which is very hard for me to say because I've had it since 2009. But yeah, it's a terrible place.
Yeah.
So and you can follow us individually. I am still on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky and Letterboxd at LH Business. And Karen, where are you?
I am on all the socials, especially Letterboxd and Instagram, but I'm on the other ones too still, at Karen M. Peterson.
And I think that will close us out for this week. Thank you so much for listening.
Bye.
So, okay, like right now, for example, the Haitians need to come to America. But some people are all, what about the strain on our resources? But it's like, when I had this garden party for my father's birthday, right? I said RSVP because it was a sit-down dinner. But people came that, like, did not RSVP. So I was, like, totally bugging. I had to haul ass to the kitchen, redistribute the food, squish in extra place settings. But by the end of the day, it was like, the more, the merrier. And so, if the government could just get to the kitchen, rearrange some things, we could certainly party with the Haitians. And in conclusion, may I please remind you that it does not say RSVP on the Statue of Liberty.